This genre has colonized the popular impression of Thoreau so completely that he's commonly either commonly either celebrated as Saint Henry of the Wilderness, or far worse, dismissed as Henry the Crank, hermit and misanthrope, and hypocrite too. Hey, everyone knows how he ran home to mother for a hot dinner and clean laundry. Sadly, neither St. Henry nor Henry the Crank has a lot to offer us today by way of practical advice or usable utopias, just when we need such advice and such utopian imagining so desperately. For evidence of what this has cost us, I want to point to one of the most important environmental historians writing today, Richard White, who in an absolutely foundational and classic work tells us to close our Thoreau, put your Walden back on the shelf, and open our Emerson. Because he says that while Emerson understands that the line between humans and nature is always kind of blurry, and therefore productive and exciting and interesting and relevant, Thoreau was, he assumes, a purist, a nature lover, sterile and worthless for the real work of today, the real work of understanding what we have done and how we have acted in nature throughout history. As White concludes, to call for a return to nature is posturing. It is a religious ritual in which the recantation of our sins and a pledge to sin no more promises to restore purity. Some people believe sins just go away. History does not go away. Well, I like Richard White's work very much and have found it absolutely formative and important, but there goes Walden, right? Closed and back on the shelf. Behind his dismissal of Thoreau looms, though, a larger problem. I mean, losing one iconic writer is annoying for those of us who love him, but much worse is the dismissal of nature altogether, as with most of my postmodern university colleagues who, like Richard White, see in nature worship at best a symptom of simple-minded nostalgia, and at worst an ideological trap blinding us to social realities, to the urban masses, to the racially and the socially marginalized, to technologies and social justice, and what's really happening to the middle landscapes that we all actually live in. In some circles, nature's become such a dirty word that worried eco-critics are pleading with us, never use it again. Stop saying that word nature. I can vouch that used incautiously without those scare quotes, it can trigger contempt. I once asked, not all that long ago, a senior and powerful colleague of mine, a literature professor, what the implications were of her ideas for the concept of nature. She fixed me with a withering stare and answered, before turning away, "I don't do nature." Well, I got to tell you, reliving that moment upset me so much as I wrote this that I had to retire out to the back patio and catch a breath while I watched one of those big Midwestern thunderstorms roll in. I asked a couple of passing crows what they thought. One of them made a crack to the other that I didn't quite catch, and instead of answering me, they just swept on by down the valley. Well, now that was a pastoral moment, of course, but what it points to is what the professor's dismissal risks losing, namely, that which was most important to Thoreau, the wild. This word points to all that is beyond words, or at least beyond human words, although I would add that language itself, that is, this ancient system that's older than we are and highly evolved, is unnervingly wild, as any good writer will tell you. That goes beyond human words to that which is unthought and cannot be thought without translating it into human terms, hence changing it into something that's more human than it is wild. There's a moment in The Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers when this sense of the wild breaks through into Thoreau's thinking about nature. And he asks impatiently, and I think it's Emerson that he's asking, May we not see God? Are we to be put off and amused in this life as if it were with a mere allegory? Is not nature rightly read that of which she's commonly taken to be the symbol merely? This last question moves us from the realm of epistemology, that is, of asking how it is we can know nature, to ontology, to asking what nature really is. And the answer that's implied is, well, nothing I can tell you about, nothing that I can put into words or symbols. Although I can, with my bodily senses, experience it. Our bodies are pretty wild too, yes? So when Thoreau addresses nature, he doesn't mean something like a sunny afternoon or a mountain meadow, but something that came before us, something that will live after us, that generates, that is generative and fatal, something that is ungraspable and often terrifying. He muses in walking, nature is a personality so vast and universal that we've never seen one of her features. So my colleague who doesn't do nature has since written one of the most important books yet published on the notion of the post-human. That is, how we are just really bundles of information that could be downloaded into any sort of material substrate, organic or machine or cyborg, and in a sense, this is a future that we should look forward to. Some of us, myself included, are arguing back that, hey, the substrate does matter. Nature isn't inert and dead until we grace it with mind. And that phrase, post-human, which I'm seeing everywhere these days, it's a profoundly unfortunate phrase because it implies after the human. But I'm sorry, I'm afraid in my part of the woods, the theory part, we are stuck with it. So many of us are trying to argue back that it doesn't mean like after the human in the kind of Terminator sense, but beyond the human in the ecological or Thoreauvian sense. That we are beings embedded in that personality so vast and universal that we cannot really ever see it. Although it makes us body and soul, even as we use it to build our own worlds, as Emerson says. To be human at all is to come into being in that very interplay, the dance, again, of body and mind. So the first cosmic step to this ecological sense of going after or beyond the human is to see the earth from the point of view of the stars. This undercuts that old division between the earth and the heavens, body and mind, ground and spirit, right? Seeing earth as a heavenly body in Thoreau's, is a way of asserting, in Thoreau's words, that heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads. Cosmos today gets this kind of imaginative reach from the same modern science that helped realize Humboldt's vision, that actually put lenses and telescopes and deployed astronomical theory and physics to put us on the moon so that we could, from the moon, look back and actually photograph Earth from the moon, as in that stunning Apollo 8 photograph that we all remember from Christmas Eve, 1968. But cosmos in Humboldt's sense is not just an ongoing enlargement of scientific knowledge, more of the usual kind of imperialism that has in some quarters given science a bad name, but this kind of fundamental reorientation in being, an ontological revolution, an insistence that our environment, our surround, is both made by us and makes us in this kind of bewildering feedback loop. So it undercuts the clear division between humans and non-humans. Scientists working out this insight today, James Lovelock, for instance, with his Gaia hypothesis, has shown how my very body, and like every living body on this planet, from microorganisms on up, are busily both made by and making the Earth's environment, the whole shebang, and soil, oceans, atmosphere, geology. A curious footnote, by the way, Humboldt almost named his book Gaia instead of Cosmos. He didn't because another writer had just used the word Gaia in what's now a very obscure work, and Humboldt thought he'd better try for something different. And on the other end, the microbiologist Lynn Margulis, another scientist, points to the way my whole body is infinitely divided and permeated and activated at the subcellular level by billions of microorganisms in symbiotic associations. So, you know, Emerson was so confident that he could tell the me, right, the inner me from the not me, but I feel strung like a mote bouncing in a beam of light. What's happened to that old Cartesian divide? We need a stronger sensory and intellectual awareness of that very otherness, that wildness that composes us at every scale level, from the cellular and the microscopic to the macroscopic and to all the bodily levels in between. But the catch is that this whole thing is wild, unpredictable, and uncertain. This immensely long achievement, this evolving narrative of the cosmos that's still writing itself as we speak, it may have a hopeful outlook when you look at it from the cosmic scale, but its continued unfolding on the local scale, our lifetimes, is not assured. This is one reason Thoreau returns so obsessively and so creatively to death. His radical, post-human, eco-cosmopolitanism, watch the theory journal near you for that phrase. Radical, post-human, eco-cosmopolitanism, I'm just putting together words that are circulating now, amounts to nothing if it can't address the bodily fact of our mortality. So speaking personally, I've never felt more aware, both intellectually and sensorially, of my own post-humanity or beyond humanity as when I was undergoing chemotherapy. I shudder with recognition when I read Thoreau on Mount Katahdin, encountering matter, he writes, vast, terrific. And Thoreau responds with terror. He writes, I fear bodies, I tremble to meet them. What is this titan that has possession of me? I think global warming is doing the same thing now to us all today on a planetary scale. I think as we displace ourselves from the Earth, lose contact with it, matter is repossessing us, and like Thoreau, we're both afraid, terrified, and exhilarated, and begging anew for contact. All this is why I'm reluctant, for all its troublesomeness, to lose the pastoral, to jettison that word, nature. I think we need to triangulate on that weird star, that radical otherness, the wild, even if it makes, maybe particularly when it makes us shudder. And I also think we need the kind of place that the pastoral provides, just a little outside of town. I mean, not doing nature means never getting outside of town and never looking back at the town and seeing it made defamiliar, the way Thoreau does when he looks back at Concord and sees it as if it were a colony of prairie dogs. I mean, from Main Street, you can't see those who don't live on Main Street, who live instead on the margins of town, the literally marginalized, like the freed slaves that were, as Thoreau writes, the former inhabitants of Walden, and whose company he keeps in his sojourn there. So that doing Walden right means alerting us, as, for instance, Elise Lemire has done in her book Black Walden, and as the Drinking Gourd Project is doing today, to the historical existence, even in Concord, of slaves and former slaves living on those borders of town. So by taking up his own role as a borderer, Thoreau can ask those hard questions about the techno-economies that we take for granted in his day about slavery. To what extent are we all slaves, though, to the modern economy? And technology, do we ride the railroad or the internet, or does it ride upon us? And the factory system, does it really exist to clothe and feed and shelter us better, or really only to make money for the owners?